let's move to your back to the story of your father. So you mentioned him briefly before about how he gave you the advice to do the 20 push-ups. Another story you mentioned from him was how he quit cigarettes cold turkey. And I think this word cold turkey is thrown around a lot as this, again, 3 a.m. motivation type thing that everyone's been there, like everyone who drinks has been there at a party, and they're like, I'm the next morning when they're throwing up, like, I'm never gonna drink again. I'm gonna quit this cold turkey. And the next week they've done it again.
Mhm.
Because it's so easy when you're in that motivational state to want to say things like, I'm gonna quit cold turkey. I'm never gonna do this again. But it seems like he actually did it. So tell me that story.
Yeah, so when I was a kid, I think like he was like really addicted. And on long road trips, I remember like every hour or so, he'd have to like park on the side of the road and like smoke. And he'd always be outside smoking and stuff. I still remember it. But I think he has some health problems with his gallbladder and stuff and other stuff. And he just became really conscious about his health. And he didn't want to influence me while I was growing up. So one day, out of the blue, he just decided to cut off smoking. And like, I remember he was like rolling around in bed because I think it's like physically painful. Obviously, I've never gone through it, but I think it's pretty physically painful. You're always craving it and you don't want to eat. It's like you're sick almost for like almost a month. But afterwards, he got a lot better. And I don't know, it was pretty um like inspiring to see because uh like I've never done drugs or anything, so I just imagine it'd be really hard. Like it's probably more difficult than anything in normal life because I've never had my mind like altered by something like that. And the fact that he could overcome like a drug addiction, which is in your head completely, is like pretty crazy to me. And it really inspired me.
Yeah, I like the piece that you mentioned that it's all in your head. Because there's something about addictions or even life in general that it's all mental, right? And your mind is creating this illusion of a world and tricking you into doing these things and doing these things. And same thing with addiction. Like your mind is like programmed to be addicted to the substance. And there's something like so interesting about that to me that because it's hard for me to understand like how this works. But I don't know, man. I know you're really into nutrition and stuff, right? So what else have you like learned about addictions in general or this topic?
Yeah, so obviously it's not completely in your head. Like, I'm taking anatomy right now. Yeah, I'm taking anatomy right now. And we're kind of learning about addiction in the brain and stuff. And it's all sorts of uh, like, like dopamine, motivation. Uh, so there's like this neurotransmitter in your head called dopamine, and it's what gives you motivation. Every time you do something that releases dopamine, you want to do that thing again and again. So some drugs like smoking or even more like severe drugs, they can like raise your dopamine levels really high, and then your body will produce more like things in your brain to get rid of that dopamine. And afterwards, those things that get rid of dopamine are still there. So little like, I don't know, like talking with your friends or like normal life experiences, they release dopamine, but then your body gets rid of it because that you've experienced such a high. So it's not completely in your head in that like, you can cure it just by thinking positive thoughts or something. But there is like a mental component. Um, like you can't, I don't think you can blame anybody for being addicted to something because it is like a physical, like chemical problem in your brain. But also, I don't think you should rule out the fact that using your own willpower, you can do things that like you don't think you could do.
What are some strategies he employed that really helped him get through that? Like, how do you think he was able to develop the willpower or the ability to not relapse and not lean back into the addiction?
Well, um, I think primarily he was motivated by like his family. the fact that he had two sons who were growing up, and you know, he started smoking when he was about like my age. And so he doesn't want that for me. He doesn't want me to, like, he can't set a good example if he's still smoking. He can't tell me to not do drugs if he's still smoking, right? So I think that really pushed him through it. And it's it's discipline. It's he was honestly like known for being a smoker. Like people would come to like reunions, like friend reunions, and like the gifts they would bring him would be like some really fancy cigarettes or something. Or like a new lighter, like a shiny new lighter or something. And then he'd say like, "Oh, I don't smoke anymore." Or like, "Thank you though." And I think that takes a lot of willpower. It's like it's the people you surround yourself with. When you have a goal like that, when you want to stop something, an addiction, or you want to like continue doing something, you should let everybody around you know that you're doing this thing because everybody will remind you of it. And if you pick up another cigarette, like my mom would probably say like what are you doing? I'd say like what are you doing? Yeah, so I think um what he did was surround himself with people who would remind him to like you can't smoke.
That's a really interesting idea. I've not heard this one before, but it makes so much sense because just knowing how human nature works, how much we care about the people around us, right? Like it's wired in our being. Because if you were a hunter-gatherer back in the day and the tribe for some reason didn't like you or didn't trust you or knew you weren't a man of your word, they leave you behind. And human strength didn't come because we're like some strong being. Like if you go fight a bear, you probably lose. But we're strong because we can collaborate. And there's not many like there are a lot of social species, but I don't think there's a social species as social as humans. Like it's all the way up here. But because of that, all the dopamine circuits in our body and everything that's intertwined in our being is so related to the people around us that if the people around us don't like us, it's like the worst feeling in the world. Like everyone's been there in that moment where like, oh, I don't have any friends, or the lonely moments are usually the moments where you feel like you don't have people, and those are usually the worst moments of life because we crave people around us because our monkey brain still thinks that if we don't have people around us, we're gonna die because we need the tribe to survive. So the strategy of telling everyone around you you're trying to achieve this goal, that will really motivate you because if everyone knows you as a guy that can't follow through with this goal, that'll activate the same feeling that is stopping us from like being lonely and not having friends, right? It's the same thing that can help us to find the motivation and the strength to push through that. So that's really interesting, man. Like you tell everyone around you you're trying to achieve this goal, and they'll all keep you accountable.
Yeah, definitely. And another thing in anatomy that I've like learned recently is that that's especially true for young people, teenagers who are developing. Like at our age, our brains haven't fully matured and we're even more susceptible to like peer pressure. And you hear peer pressure as sort of like a bad thing, but you could use it to your advantage if you understand that your brain is more susceptible to peer pressure, then like use the strategy I just outlined right there. It's just like tell everybody about your goals. And that's kind of like what I did. Like I'm motivated because everybody knows that I bench press. If I stop bench pressing, then like what would they think of me? I'm like motivated by that peer pressure, but in a good way. Yeah.
You watch a lot of do you watch any podcasts at all? I know you're talking about Lex Friedman before, but do you watch podcasts in general?
Yeah, I like it's kind of hard for me to fall asleep sometimes, so like I just listen to a podcast before bed to get me in like the sleepy kind of mood. But yeah, I listen to Lex Friedman, and I listen to Andrew Huberman. Is he does like health kind of stuff. Lex Friedman is more like I don't know, like philosophy, politics kind of. Yeah.
The reason I mentioned this is because I would say that a lot of my growth in who I am as a person came in the last year. I think 2023 was a year where I grew a lot as a person. And when I say that, I mean my character, my values, and my health in general. Those are the big three. And if I think back to like how was I able to grow so much in like the areas, whether it be like my mental state or my discipline or whatever that might be. If I look back, I think the reason why I was able to grow so much is because I spent a lot of time watching podcasts. But what does that actually do to you? It's kind of like you hear that quote that you are the combination of the five people you surround yourself with, right? I might have butchered that a little bit, but if you surround yourself with like five people that like to party a lot, that'll probably be the person you end up kind of becoming. But because I spent a lot of time watching podcasts from people like Andrew Huberman and from people like Chris Williamson, it's kind of like they became like the people in my life that I spent time with, even if I was just watching an hour or two of their content a week. Like they were slowly brainwashing me and inserting these mindsets into me that they might not have originally be my own, but now they feel like my own because I've consumed so much of this content that has transformed me into who I go on to become. So this goes back to what we were talking about with the cigarette thing, right? Where you're talking about tell everyone around you your goals. But also when you say that the people around you play a huge role in who you become, it's also just the people you surround yourself with, right? If you watch an hour of a podcast a week and you don't even take an action step, just the fact that you're listening to the podcast is slowly like changing the wiring of your brain where you'll just remember something 2 years from now and do a thing just because of something you learned in a podcast 2 years ago. And that's happened so many times for me. But yeah, man, I think for anyone who's trying to grow, I think the single reason or the single thing that allowed me to grow in the last year was literally just the content I consume, just consuming more content. And obviously, you don't want to be like sitting in your room watching 8 hours of podcasts a day. Like that's it's kind of sad.
Yeah, of
But
course.
I think integrating that into your life, where you're driving to work, you listen to music, go on a podcast tomorrow instead, or like you're on a flight, or finding ways to integrate that. I think that is a single thing that's changed. Do you agree with that? Do you think that I know you watch Andrew Huberman, right? That's a great health guy, and I know Lex Friedman as well. Do you think they've helped you to improve your life?
Yeah, definitely. Well, I think Andrew Huberman, especially because he has so many tips that you can implement into, like for me, I think sleep is a big thing. I have trouble falling asleep sometimes, and his advice, it works pretty well. But the thing that I find like problematic about podcasts and stuff is that it's no different than like other content you consume in a way. Even though it's helpful, it's kind of a source of like instantaneous like motivation. Going back to what we were talking about before. Uh like listening to a podcast doesn't mean you're improving yourself. Like you're learning new things that you can use to improve yourself, but you're not actively improving yourself. And so I think people can't just watch podcasts to improve. Like you said, they need to actually take a step by themselves and learn these things like for themselves. But definitely I think podcasts are helpful in teaching you certain things like Andrew Huberman doesn't try to motivate you or anything. He just, he outlines like, oh, this thing is good for your health, you can start doing it. And then I do it. And that's the important thing. I actually do it. And if you're just sitting there and listening and you don't do anything, it's not really worth your time.
But that's the question though. How do you actually do it? Like someone's probably sitting there watching this right now. How does he actually use like one thing that we learned today and actually implement it? How do you think so?
That's a good question. I think whenever you try to do something new, don't be like swayed by your impulse, the motivation, like the impulsive motivation. Don't be swayed by that. It doesn't always work out. Like if you're listening to this at night, right before you go to sleep, and you think, "Oh wow, that's some like crazy good advice. Like I should do it right now." Like that's your impulsiveness speaking. You should wait for like the right time where once you start it, you can continue doing it. Like um if I just wrestled Massimo that one time and like kept on just wrestling him, going back to him and like I don't know, like wrestling wherever we could, like I don't think I'd make that much progress. But instead, I found a time I went to watch one of the wrestling meets, and after the meet, I asked the coach if I could join the program. And then I got in, and that kind of forces me to like stick with wrestling. So, um, yeah, like whenever you start something, don't rely on your impulse. Rely on your own will. Or if you can't rely on your own will, rely on somebody else guiding you and like forcing you to do it.
If you enjoyed that segment with Ryan Liu, then you're going to enjoy the full 2 hour length podcast that I recorded with him. Click here to watch the full length podcast and don't forget to like and subscribe for more.